Well, this week we have the BizNews Investment Conference, where we would have had Peter Major in person, but of course he's in the United States at the moment, making money for his company. We all need a side hustle, I suppose. So especially those who share their wisdom with us. But Peter Major has just witnessed a massive deal for a company that he's invested in. I know, because he's told us about it. And a company that was the bedrock of South Africa for many years and is now going to get even further diluted with its SA presence. I'm talking Anglo American, and the deal this morning by Teck Resources. The only reason why we're talking on the same day is because of this BizNews conference. So perfect timing. Peter Major, I know you've just kind of woken up. Have you had a chance to look at Anglo-Teck yet?
Boy, what a surprise. I just saw that come through last night, but I was so zombie mode and there wasn't a lot written on it. I said, well, I'll catch up in the morning. But boy, in the morning, everybody else is ahead of me. My phone is jammed up with announcements from Anglos, analysts, brokers, interested investors. And yeah, I've tried to go through it this morning. If you look at the official Anglo statement, it is very involved, Alex. So my first question was, how was this kept quiet for so long? Because these are two big companies. They're almost the same size, close to $25 billion each. And when you work through the official statements, the different classes of shares, how the debt's going to be handled, etc. Yeah, nobody had an inkling of this that I know of until about 12 hours ago.
And that's exactly why in the press conference this morning, I managed to jump in there and ask a couple of questions. And I asked Duncan if they'd actually spoken with the PIC, their biggest shareholder, the Public Investment Commissioners here in South Africa, because you'd have thought if they'd had some kind of engagement, something would have leaked. And he said, yes, we've been talking to them, but nothing came out. So well done to them too.
That's even more amazing. I didn't know that. Yes, if they were talking to the PIC and it didn't leak out here, wow. I don't know what else to say. Wow.
Extraordinary that last night we had the Financial Times reporting it. Well, it came through early this morning. And then, of course, all the announcements and so on. But you know Anglo-American. You love Anglo-American. You've told us about Anglo-American. We don't know Teck Resources here in South Africa. All we know is that it's a Canadian company that's been around for more than 100 years. Give us some color on that one, Pete.
Look, I'm a Canadian half the time, so I should know more about Teck. Teck was originally Cominco, which was a Canadian company. And funny enough, Cominco was looking at buying silver mines in the Silver Valley here back in the early 70s, just before silver took off. Cominco, now Teck, they own virtually the only operating base metal smelter still left in the Northwest. In fact, still left almost in America, Alec. So it's right on the border of Washington, Idaho, British Columbia. And it's a beautiful area. And usually when you see a smelter, it looks like World War III hit it, all the ground around it. But it's a beautiful part of the country. And it's got a waterfall, huge Columbia River going by it. It was started by one of the owners and titans of Anaconda Copper Company, Butte, Montana, at the turn of the century. So, yeah, that's Teck Resources. They've got some operations in British Columbia, but they're famously known for that Trail smelter, huge, modern, very clean smelter. It's old, but I say modern because it's been modernized to allow it to keep producing. And they have the Red Dog zinc mine up in Alaska. That's got to be the world's richest zinc mine. Cobway Zinc was when Anglo American had it in Zambia. But for the last 30 years, 40 years, Red Dog Zinc. And so Teck is a very important zinc producer. They're a very large copper producer now, 550,000 tons a year. I think Anglo's copper is 750,000 tons a year. and they've narrowed down their portfolio. Compliments of Glencore, who took all their coal in a big deal not even 2 years ago. And it's very interesting how Glencore was trying to take over Teck. They really, really tried hard. That was their first prize. We all know Billiton was trying very, very hard to take over Anglos. And I think this merger had a lot to do with that. In this environment, taking over is a risk. Being taken over, big risk. And yeah, I don't want to go on and say, oh, this is a marriage made in heaven, but this is a marriage of close to equals. You can see the share price of Anglos, the market likes it. Okay, they're paying a big fat dividend as well, but probably Anglos needed to do something like this. We can say, oh, in the old days they grew. Yeah, in the old days, a lot of things were better and different. But right now, under the current circumstances and environment, the way the world is, President Trump, China, Russia, mining, I I think there's more pluses in this deal than negative, and the market seems to think the same.
Listening to Duncan Wanblad this morning, he said the cultures are similar. Now, you would have thought two companies over a century old each, there would be some kind of a culture overlap. Was he exaggerating there?
No, but I think the family culture in tech is newer, stronger, fresher. The family culture in Anglo American, it's faded. It's much more in the past. I don't think Nikki Oppenheimer or his sisters or their trusts. I don't even know if they've got shares in Anglos anymore. If they do, they're very much an ordinary here today, gone tomorrow shareholder. I don't know what part of it is in their portfolio, but the nostalgic bit of Anglo American, hey, nobody misses it more than me and wishes we could get it back. But the government here is pretty much nuked it completely. They didn't just do a Hiroshima; they followed up with a Nagasaki, and so that's for the history books. They can never replicate anything in South Africa like they did before. The environment here is way, way too different. I'll use the word toxic, and it's historical animosity. For 40 years, the ANC has very publicly, strongly given their opinion of Anglo American and what it owes the country, what it owes the people, etc. So yeah, they were to, like I said, Anglos was historically a peer family company for virtually 90 years. Tech, I think that family, I don't know how far they go back, but it's much more recent. But they're very strong. The family there now really controls this. If you didn't want to, you had to cater to just about everything they wanted if you wanted to do this deal.
And so the family will ensure that tech does go from its side. It's going to be all thumbs up. But what about Anglo's side? They need 50% of shareholders to vote in favor. Are they opening a door to another hostile takeover? But I did ask that, but he kind of hedged a little bit. It was almost, well, we can only do what we can do, which I thought was quite interesting.
I think that's true, Alec. And that was my first thought. Oh, is somebody else going to come in and try and grab this? Look, Billiton tried really hard last year. The price they were offering, I think Anglo shareholders will wait a long time in real terms to get that price again. And as much as I was happy they didn't accept it last year, that was a juicy, tempting offer. And I don't know if Billiton could have justified it later on. Not that stops these kind of things from happening. I don't know. I think Duncan's being genuine. Yeah, we don't know. Can theoretically someone come in and make another bid? Yeah, I think they can. But the fact that both sides shareholders like this deal so much, that counts for a lot. And I think Anglo shareholders are going to do better going with this deal than they are turning it down. Unless someone comes in in a purely mercenary basis and just offers much higher all cash deal, then there's a percentage of Anglo shareholders that'll say, yeah, we'll take the money. It's not the Anglos we thought it was, or it's never going to be the Anglos we'd hoped for. We'll take the money. So I don't know. There's definitely a break fee in here and a lot of other agreements that the two together have done all they can to ensure they will go through with this deal. But there's always a chance somebody from outside can do something crazy. But whether that's a Chinese company or BHP or some other, their shareholders also have to be answered to. And they will say, okay, why are you offering this crazy deal? It's going to be hostile. Anglos is going to fight it again. We're going to spend a lot of money. It'd have to be a pretty convincing pitch to its own shareholders if there's another predator.
The much maligned Cynthia Carroll might be just having a smile or two today, because if Anglo had not gone balls to the wall for copper, this wouldn't have happened, would it? It's very much a copper deal.
You know, as I get older, hopefully I get a little more wisdom. And I really liked Tony Traer. I thought he was the perfect appointment. He'd come up through Anglos, he'd proven himself with Mondi and a bit more. But we heard a lot how the board and he were fighting almost all the time. And it shows it was a different environment then. And okay, they had a chairman who I don't think had much attachment to Anglos, hadn't been there too long. Before you know it, he brings forward Cynthia and puts her on. Look at the iron ore. She got it at the worst possible time. Thus, she paid way, way too much. It went over budget trying to develop her, and it probably ensured her demise. But that iron ore is kicking butt now. So, yeah, the IRR of the money that they put into it, maybe now it's got a return, probably not great. But you're right. Cynthia expanded the copper. She got the iron ore. Cost a lot, including her job. Cost shareholders a lot. You know, and we can't say, oh, had she held off, the market would have fallen and she would have got it for almost nothing. Yeah, that's true. I do think, though, she bought it at what looked like a real peak, Alec. Anglos had been trying to get iron ore under Tony Traer. Maybe he moved too slow, but hey, the market always gives you a second chance. So it's usually better if you move too slow in investing, I found out, than if you move too fast. It's
ore,
almost always better. Yeah.
The iron ore, they were emphatic again this morning in the presser. I asked him about Kumba, and he said absolutely that's staying in the portfolio. That's going nowhere. Talking about iron ore, what about ARM? They came out with results today. Africa Rainbow, I'm sorry, not today, this week. Africa Rainbow Minerals. They've got some pretty useful assets in there as well. How are you seeing that one?
Man, we did an interesting graph comparison a few times this year. ARM versus Exxaro. And in a way, you couldn't have two more different companies. One's run by Patrice Motsepe, South Africa's, arguably Africa's richest or second richest native black African. And then you've got Exxaro. And people aren't sure, is Exxaro a quasi-government entity? It seems to cater more to government than it does to shareholders, although government's probably the largest single shareholder through the PIC. But yeah, the management changes that we see at Exxaro and the public spats they have internally, and then you compare it with ARM, that everything's very stable, happy. Okay, what am I getting at? Neither's outperformed the other in 20 years. So wherever you threw your money, you got the same return. Why is that? Why is Exxaro seems to do everything wrong, and yet they just pull through? Is it because they inherited great assets from Anglo American? I think that's a lot to do with it because you can't say perpetual chaos in your board and your management and your CEO, perpetual freaking chaos and changes. That can't lead to good outperformance. And yet they've performed as well as ARM. So then you have to look at ARM and say, okay, why haven't you outperformed Exxaro when they have all this chaos in the executive team, nonstop, directors coming and going, CEOs, chairman? Why have you not outperformed? Is it your assets? Well, hell, ARM's got Harmony Gold Mine. So for a long time, gold wasn't doing that great, but Harmony Gold Mine's stunning return. Okay, platinum. I think they've been unsuccessful most of the time in their platinum. It shows how complicated and difficult platinum mining is. Even with that run in the platinum price, and that did help ARM. Then yeah, let's come to their iron ore. Let's come to their manganese. Um, I don't know what to say, Alec. I want to add value here. I don't want to just ramble on and
Mm,
spew at
mm.
hot air, but it's an exercise that I haven't come to a conclusion. Why hasn't ARM outperformed if they got it? I always thought they had a better management team. I thought they had assets just about as good. Um, and they've got coal. They've got manganese, iron ore. They got the winning materials that
I,
Exxaro does.
I want to throw something at you. Warren Buffett said that the reason why he loved newspapers back in the day, before the digital world came through, is he said because you want to own a business that still makes money when the village idiot runs it, because one day he will. And his view was that newspaper managements were pretty awful as generally because they ran mini monopolies in wherever their newspapers were based. Is there not an argument for, and I'm not saying that the village idiots are running either ARM or Exxaro, but is there not a similar argument here that you take Sasol's a similar situation? Sasol just performs when the oil price in rands is doing well. It doesn't matter what the management does, good or bad, it seems, has only a marginal impact. Is that not also the case very much in these big mining companies with such huge portfolios of assets?
It is, Alec. I've used that analogy quite often. Um, in fact, I didn't know it applied to newspapers. I thought newspapers were about as great an investment as airlines. When you book your airline ticket, I know my ticket here to America costs less than it did when I first went to South Africa in January 82, and I bought that ticket in 81. So what is that? 44 years later, and it's cheaper to fly. So yeah, airline stocks and newspaper stocks, mama mia. But without a doubt, if you're in the right commodity in mining, the right commodity means what's running. It doesn't matter who management is, and it doesn't matter what they do. But if you want to sustainably beat the index, if you want to sustainably beat the all share index or the S&P index, then you need good assets and good management. Um, and we often say Anglo's never had bad assets. And that is pretty much true in my view. Ernest Oppenheimer knew how to choose assets. He knew how to run them as well. He knew how to build them from scratch. I believe Harry as well. And Harry, I think, was even better at choosing management or helping structure management to run assets that were difficult. Okay, that said, if we look at Charter, that was such a disaster, and we thought they did everything right. But yeah, on the whole, good assets will see you through. If you've got a great gold asset and the gold price falls, you're still going to make money because it's a rich ore body and it's fairly economical to mine. If you got a bad gold asset, well, you'll make money when the price of gold goes up, but your costs are high and management doesn't do the right thing. So when the gold price goes down, your share can go down 90% or whatever. Anglos has great assets. Exxaro inherited very good assets. So you're right. Most of the peripheral things they tried to do were a disaster, but they always bounced back because of the assets they got that came from Anglo American. Great assets. And
So
a lot of arms assets similar.
it's a good, solid basis from which to look at the mining industry. If you can get the underlying assets, it's not like maybe a, a services company. If a bank is badly run, it'll go bankrupt. If a property company is badly run, it's history as well. But if you've got the assets and it's a solid ore body, as you say, well, it's the value will come out. If you've got crappy assets, it's going to be always going to be very difficult to turn that to account. It's a very good point to have a look at. Just before we move off this, because I'm so interested to hear your thoughts on the next topic, which is Tether investing in other words, a cryptocurrency investing in gold mines. Copper. Before we move off here, this is a huge bet by Anglo American into copper, which it's not that long ago in the history of Anglo that it didn't have any copper. So what do you make of all that?
Well, Anglo's got interested in copper originally in the late 20s, early 30s. Ernest Oppenheimer said that was a great move getting into gold. Diamonds were going to kill us. They're too volatile. We get the market just in balance, and then somebody finds another giant diamond mine and goes on his own to the market, floods it, ruins the market, and then he goes broke and comes crawling to me and asking me to help him out. And I'm losing money in the meantime, trying to support the market, closing half my mines, waiting for the market to get in balance. So getting gold was a great stabilizer. But he said, gee, win stay, lose change. I'm diversifying, and it's a great buttress to my company. I'm going to diversify more. And copper, boy, it's the middle of the future. And I'm in Africa, and we're the producer of the future for copper. And Ernest had to take on some big American companies in Zambia and Congo, but he moved faster and quicker than them, worked with the government, the British, and he had great copper assets. And it was horrible, I thought, for everybody, for the country and for Anglos, when they were nationalized in the 60s and the 70s, because Anglo was rapidly transforming in the 60s those assets into black management. And they had good training facilities up there. Not only did they have the copper smelter, they had precious metal refinery for the byproducts. They had ZAM's ZAM manganese, ZAM coal, they were mining. So it was sad that those things were nationalized when they were the way they were. And you're right. So Anglos, they had a modicum of copper because they got to hold a little bit of the tail asset that was a nationalized company, but they had no say in what was going on. So copper is very, very small. And then we saw Minorco get into Collahuasi in Peru. And boy, that's because they couldn't get anything good in Chile at the time. Chile was taken up, it was the darling. Peru was the new frontier, and Peru has fantastic ore bodies in base metals. Geez. So they got in through Minorco, and they've been growing their copper ever since. And it's turned out to be a very prescient decision and strategy. Copper, there's always a profit margin in copper, kind of like gold. Um, Copper is even less volatile than gold used to be, but companies built up what they are today because there was a profit margin in gold. Yes, it would fall, but it wouldn't fall to nothing because people always wanted it. And people want it so much now, as you said. Here's Tether and some of these Bitcoin lookalikes. They're now using their friggin' income to buy gold. Well, geez, if anything's going to make the world more bullish on gold, it's when these pseudo instruments that are good at raising billions of dollars are laundering that money into hard assets called gold. Geez, if that doesn't support gold, Alec, well, we've seen the result.
What I found really, it gave me a chuckle. They call it natural Bitcoin. So gold, gold is now natural Bitcoin.
Yeah,
How the wheel has turned. But is it a good or a bad thing that they are getting, well, diversifying their own portfolios, if you like, from the US dollar into gold?
it's a good thing for them, and it's turning out to be a great thing for the gold price because this is something that's never existed before. You know, we've been saying China didn't exist before 30 years ago. You know, in the 70s, they weren't a player. Well, now China's as big as America, but the government is officially buying gold, a lot of it, more than anybody else. And we know the population there is buying gold, and they're allowed to, and they want to, and they're 1.4 billion strong, and they got a lot more income per Chinese citizen than they did in the 70s and 80s. So it's no wonder gold is raging upward like it is, because you've got all these buyers and players that want it that essentially weren't around 20 years ago.
I recall some years ago, well, 20 years ago, it was all about India. And when the Indian market was buying gold, then you knew that you had this firm undertone. But if we take it one step further, we've had a raging bull market for an extended period now. Which of the gold stocks, and we can start off with those two South African managed, biggest in the world companies, but which of them are offering value to you today? If you were forced to buy a gold counter, which one would it be?
Boy, I think Pan African has probably beat the rest. I haven't done a graph of it. And why? Because it can grow, Alec. All these gold shares are running like crazy now on the gold price. And the marginal ones like Durban Deep, they grow exponentially. They grow even more than one that's got a full profit margin because it's so marginal, it has higher gearing. But who can grow volume? And that's the company that investors want to get, right? Can Newmont grow volume? No bloody way. You know, can Barrick grow volume? Hell, they have to grow volume to counter the volume that's being taken away from them by Mali and countries like it. You know, they're too big to add 10, 15% production per annum. Pan African is growing volume. And I was critical of them when they bought that gold asset in Australia. I said that they paid a very good price, a very high price for this. And if gold goes down, they're going to look like, well, we were saying Sibanye or Impala or anybody that buys something at a high price. But after Neil Froneman bought Sibanye, bought Stillwater, the price didn't go down. The price went up multiples of those PGMs. So it actually turned out to be an okay deal. And maybe when the price went down, then it didn't look so great. But he made so much money. Sibanye made so much money after that deal. Pan African, they've done the same. They bought something, paid a high price for it, but gold has escalated so much higher. They are paying for that asset out of its profits now. And that's increased their volume as well. So you're getting a double whammy buying Pan African or a stock like it, that it can grow their volume every month, every year in the middle of the greatest bull run we have ever seen in the history of man. This run has been going since 2002, 2003. So 24 years.
Pan African was in the news as well this week with the upgrading of its listing to the main board in London. Will that give it much of a boost?
My gosh, that's why Alec Hogg is irreplaceable because he looks at every angle. You're right. They're now moving from the small cap listed board to the main board. And we all know what happens when you're on that main board. Oh boy, all these all these exchange traded funds, pension funds, you know, all these index trackers, which are what, 95% of all fund managers, they now have to have you. They might not even know who you are, but they have to have you. So, boy, if that isn't another retro rocket kicking Pan African up, you know, giving it a more solid base, because now it has this huge investor base that has to buy them, whether the gold price is going up or not, has to buy them.
One of the advantages of having a few grey hairs is that you have got a long history, and certainly from my perspective, when you talk Pan African, I recall the visit I made to Barberton to their operations there, and to have a look at the gold bowl, as they called it, which was this incredibly rich reserve or resource that had been mined out, obviously, by the old timers. But they were forever hopeful that they would find another gold bowl, another huge source of gold that would transform their fortunes. What's going on in Barberton? Is it still part of the Pan African story?
Very much, Alec. Very much. And they're treating some difficult dumps there, and now they've got the money to even expand that. And they've got the money to expand Barberton. It was a tricky operation. It's not like these large tabular deposits we've got on the Witwatersrand, like a tabletop that you could drill in each corner of your property and put one hole in the middle and say, wow, length times width times height. I got 500 million tons. I got 100 million tons here. Barberton is a vein type structure that we see in a lot of the rest of the world. Idaho's got a lot like that. And that's why you don't get the big players, because it's hard to determine where the vein's going, what it's going to do next. But the veins are consistent as far as being there. It's just you can't lay out this mine to do 100,000 tons a month. You probably are lucky if you can lay out one of those veins or ore bodies, it'll give you 50,000 tons a month. So when Anglo ran the Barberton area for decades, they had 4 or 5 little mines, each concentrated on the vein, and they'd done a pretty good job of making the best of that situation. Pan Africa now, they pretty much can do the same. There's other players there, but they're the big player. They're the dominant one. They can kind of name their tune, because we know little mines just can't make it in today's world. They battled to make it even 100 years ago with very few rules and regulations. Well, now it's virtually impossible for small mines to make it. There's too much overhead, rules, regulations, government, community, ESG, the list goes on. So Pan African's in a good place there. They can increase that production, not a lot, but hey, if you're increasing it 5% a year and you can do that for 5 or 10 years, that's great. So yeah, the Barberton area is not dying out. With this gold price, it's only going to expand.
It's a lovely story, Pan African, and one that I'm sure your hordes of fans are going to go and research and look through the information now to see whether or not they should also be invested there. Pete, before we leave, I don't know if you had a chance, or indeed if you were able to take in the Transnet results. They make a big song and dance about it here in South Africa, but wow, maybe Transnet thinks they're doing well. All the signs we get from industry is that that's not really the case. Are you getting much feedback along those?
Similar to yours, Alec. And I read that thing twice today in between trying to read what Anglos and Tech were doing. And I don't want to be too cynical because I don't know what's behind those numbers. They look too good to be true. And the jargon is too much cut and paste. We're expanding this, we're improving this. Our plan is to improve for the next 5 or 10 years. We've all got a plan like that. Show me one person you know who isn't planning to do better today, tomorrow, next year. But how many people, how many organizations can execute? Like Vince Lombardi said, the main rules in football are execute, execute, execute. We probably got our own Vince Lombardi, Green Bay Packers in the Springboks, huh? That's what I hear Raz was talking about all the time. Rousey, execute. So can Transnet execute what needs to be done? Not in my lifetime. And why? Because they're too a part of the government. The Nats worked hard at making Transnet efficient, profitable, and you could say it was touch and go. It was never conclusive that it was a better railroad. than their peers overseas. But the Nats worked hard, and it was world class, and it did really help our mining industry. And Eskom was definitely world class. That was a parastatal that had its own life. It did much better than Transnet. But I'm tired of reading these articles for 15 years now about all the profits that Eskom was making. And we knew it was pure bullshit. It was pure smoke and mirrors. You know, it was fooling nobody, even the government ministers. Well, maybe they kind of believed it. But unfortunately, Transnet's been clouded that way. And is it doing better than Eskom right now? I don't know. But is it fixing all the things that were blatantly destroyed by the ANC government for the last 20 years? It's trying to fix them, but they are damaged too much, and its balance sheet is too stretched. And for the good of the country, it has to privatize as rapidly as possible. And it's kind of doing that the last couple of years. It's Miss Phillips. It's but it's not doing it fast enough. It's got to hand over these important arteries like the coal rail and the iron ore rail. It's got to give those at least majority control to private industry. They can do this quick enough to save the country and save Transnet and save mining here. It's just and these figures, I don't want to call them fake, but they're gibberish. You know, I couldn't make a decision writing those. Geez, if it was a listed company, those would be very different figures.
Yeah, and there's some bonds as well. Bondholders will be looking at that and maybe having the same disquiet that you have. But is there any template anywhere in the world that can be applied to South Africa? In other words, where when you look at the telecoms industry, where there've been monopolies, as in South Africa, you had Telkom, in Germany, Deutsche Telekom, in Britain, British Telecom, and so on. And they were privatized, and it was a far, far better industry today than it would have been in the past. Is there anything similar that you could almost take to your people in Pretoria and say, look, here's what's possible?
Oh, without a doubt. You got 200 countries that provide examples. You got very detailed history books and videos and documentaries detailing what countries have done by privatizing. I can't think of a great example they should blindly follow right now. American railroads. On the freight side, American railroads are pretty world class. On the passenger side, Europe is. If we look at China, nobody knows railroads better than China. That's massive government intervention. And our government will probably say, yeah, look at China. They're totally controlling their railroads and they're doing a good job. So you have to look at a country and say, what are its capabilities? Our capabilities here for government to do a good job at anything, unfortunately, they've been tried, tested, and proven conclusively for 30 years. So this government can't change, no matter how it might want to. It can't change. It's incorporated too many bad habits, bad protocols. It's got too many rogue players in there. It's got no control over anything. But let's look at the Australian railroads as far as transporting iron ore. Geez, there's an example. And you know, government by privatizing, they're not losing on taxes. They're not losing on control. You know, they can still make lots of rules, but geez, by trying to hang on now when they don't have they don't have the financial capability, they don't have the managerial capability, and Transnet's operate in a difficult environment. You know, crime. Geez, it's that's something totally out of their hands. So, yeah, there's good examples there. We need somebody in government that wants to do what's best for the country and damn everything else.
But it's almost like you sometimes need to just open people's eyes. And in this case, the point you made about efficient railroads delivering a lot of money to government through taxes must be something that there's got to be a ding dong moment somewhere for somebody, because if you consider the amount of tax receipts that South Africa Inc. or South African government, South Africa as a country has lost through the
Oh,
incompetence and the just the inability to get stuff to the ports. It's got to be eye-watering.
Alec, just think of the construction boom that would happen if our iron exporters were allowed to have a consortium and take over that railroad. If our coal producers were allowed to take over the coal rail, Richards Bay coal line, think of the implications down the road. You would have a massive hiring, a massive construction companies like we could have had with Murray and Roberts and all the rest of them. And think of the steel. All of a sudden, ArcelorMittal would be producing steel. It just ticks every box. But they're so focused on the words privatization that they're blinded to all the benefits that it would bring. Taxes, jobs, construction, industries would blossom all over to service these railroads like we've never seen before.
And a very simple seed to be planted, please, amongst those who are perhaps blinded at the moment or blinkered at the moment. Let the iron ore companies get together and take over the iron ore railroad. Let the coal companies get together and take over the coal railroad. And as Peter says, that will have a massive multiplier effect and also relieve the taxpayer of the burden that the true burden that Transnet is to this country. Peter Major is with Modern Corporate Solutions. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com, and this has been the Miningweb Weekly.